It was really only a matter of time before we got here. Before we talked about the single most frustrating and yet simultaneously disappointing factor of Three Houses/Hope's story. The Agarthans. Technologically advanced enough to drop ballistic missiles that can wipe out cities, and yet are dumb enough to waste them on proving a point. Cruel and malicious enough to experiment on children, and yet they for some reason allow at least one of them to live without any consequences. These utter clowns of characterization, these discount Grimleal dubstep goth basement dwellers give me a headache just thinking about them. They're like a black hole of storytelling, warping and bending every aspect until they are necessary to the plot while contributing nothing. They just disappoint me. Okay, we all know how this goes. I'm supposed to give a background lesson on their history, but at the risk of retreading old ground, let's try to make this quick. It won't be. The Agarthans are the original culture of Fodlan. Sothis showed up and started spreading goodness as well as her own children, the Nabateans, helping to advance the Agarthan society. The Agarthans got full of themselves and did some war with Sothis and her Nabateans. Spoilers, they lost, and Sothis fell asleep after healing the land post-war. Fleeing underground, they bided their time, an act made easier due to their advanced technology, such as their cores, which house their souls and allow them to be passed on to a new body. Said cores were actually developed by a once obscure man named Epimenides, who appears to have risen to prominence just before the War of Heroes, or perhaps even during the First Agarthan-Nabatean War. Eventually, under the leadership of Lord Epimenides, their greatest mage and shaman, they devised a plan to wipe out the Nabateans who remained as Sothis lay in deep sleep. They found a seemingly random bandit named Nemesis, told him to steal the body of a sleeping god, and he decided that living safely was living boring, because he did it and never even got caught. Well, never got caught in the act. We'll get to that. For his act of grand theft goddess, the Dead Mouse Association churned up Sothis and made a sword from her, took her blood and gave Nemesis the Crest of Flames, and jammed the heart of Sothis into the sword to allow it to work in tandem with the Crest of Flames. There is some stuff, like translations from God-Shattering Star, to suggest that, at least to Nemesis, he saw this as all some kind of justifiable action in the name of freeing humanity from the Nabateans' presence as false gods. Of course, that's hard to verify due to the source, and it could just be propaganda that Nemesis is spouting afterwards. It could even be the madness he uses to justify his cruelty, or all of the above. After that, well, Nemesis went on to do a little trolling, a little bit of goofing, and a tad bit of genocide. 11 of Nemesis's compatriots were later also given crests and relics, perhaps 15 if we follow the theory that the four apostles began as part of Nemesis's crew. These crests came from the blood of slain Nabateans, and the relics were made from their bones. And with them, Nemesis and his clans carved out a kingdom in the northern chunk of Fodlan. What the Nightcore nerds were doing for the next century, or however long Nemesis made his kingdom, is unknown, but eventually they rose back from their mother's basement when a few Nabateans that they missed went and formed an empire in the south to fight Nemesis. Epimenides, having some modicum of principles, chose to dedicate resources and manpower to Nemesis as he was still technically their ally, even if Epimenides saw Nemesis as little more than a maddened beast. Epidermis actually led several successful missions in defense against the Empire's onslaught, even fighting to a draw against the combined forces of the Church and Empire led by definitely not Sethith and Flayn, and even Saros herself. At a certain point, Epimenides, creator of the Soul Cores and master of both light and dark magic, basically became a godlike figure to his people. Despite that, Nemesis still wound up stabbed to death in the middle of a field, and Epimenides' current body was probably killed. Lucky for him, his core and consciousness was passed from one host to the next, with him creating Arval as a sort of preparatory in-between in case of an emergency. I say that tentatively, though. There are two possible interpretations of how their cores work. First is that they transplant them into new bodies that they then adapt to their liking after, hence the body snatching, while still being able to turn into their preferred forms. Alternatively, they're able to maintain multiple bodies at once, like their different forms or something, and they just swap between them at will, with the caveat that they will still die if killed even in a different form, as seen with Cornelia and Arundel. The latter explanation makes more sense to me based off what we've seen in the games, but I'd love to see your takes on it. The lost people of Ratlantis would fade away and appear to go dormant for several centuries. It wouldn't be until almost 600 years after Nemesis that they'd make their move against Fodlan by aiding Lugh and his Northern Rebellion. Pan, an unknown figure who could be epidural for all we know, was Lug's main contact for special soldiers and weapons. I actually don't think Epitapanum, look it up, was Pan, and that's for a reason we'll get into much later. Their plan with Lug actually worked as intended, as the territory of Fargus is split off from the Empire and made independent, splintering the power of one of their former enemies. Soon enough, a power struggle occurs in Leicester that lasts around a century, with them trying to be independent, getting taken over, and then getting independence properly due to a succession crisis. That which sachets into the deep may have had something to do with it, but details are vague. That said, it's not out of their wheelhouse due to Shambhala being located in Alliance territory. However, as we approach the modern day, they start ramping up their actions. They replace a beloved mage who healed the kingdom from plague, who proceeds to manipulate the new queen of Fargus, Edelgard's mother. They also have Happy locked in a closet somewhere, but that's not important right now. Through these manipulations, they instigate the tragedy of Dusker to destabilize Fargus and grant Dimitri his own kind of madness, almost as if they're hoping for a second coming of Nemesis. Meanwhile, a few years before, and kind of at the same time, in Adressia, they seep into the highest reaches of the country during a time of political unrest, replacing Lord Arundel with their current leader, Talus. You may wonder what happened to Epidermal, but we'll get to that. Around the same time, the Alliance territory of Ordelia gets involved with Hrim's attempted secession from the Empire, and gets taken over by a specific wing of the Empire, one entirely made up of a certain type of dark mage. They proceed to experiment upon every single child there in an attempt to manifest two crests within their bodies. Only one is successful, and then they leave. I don't know why they leave, but they did, and if I'm remembering right, it was around this time that they replaced Tomas, a librarian who worked at Garrickmach Monastery. The timeline would appear to match up, although it's possible this was just when they became aware of him. All this leads to Edelgard being returned to the Empire just before the tragedy, brought back by her uncle, who is 100% a body snatcher now. They who slink under the drawbridge... Listen, I'm scraping the bottom of a barrel here, I'm gonna have to start reusing nicknames. They had firm control over the Imperial household by this point, and they took the entire Imperial family captive as they finalized their crest experiments. I think we all know the end result of that. About this time, they were also involved in the sabotage and death of Lord Godfrey, the heir and only son of Duke Oswald, Sovereign Duke of the Alliance. Said event also led to the death of Raphael's parents. Tiana, Oswald's daughter, also vanished, although that was just because she was looking for hot single Almirans on the other side of the mountains. Roughly a year before the start of the game, Tomas is certainly replaced by Solon by this point, and they kidnap Monica von Ox, an old... friend? Stalker? Of Edelgard's.
Thank you for the compliment.
Edelgard is willing to allow this to give her yet another in into the church for her coming revolution. With the Alliance leadership destabilized, an Imperial princess designed to be the second coming of Nemesis, a king in the north who could also be the second coming of Nemesis and is too unstable for the church to trust, the Tunnel Snakes are set to enact the largest overthrow the continent has ever seen. And then they do a whole lot of nothing. See, the greatest problem with the Agarthans is who they are during the game, despite all they're connected to in the background. All I've explained paints the picture of an intensely competent, secretive race that are master manipulators and organizers. But in practice, they dangle about in the story, only acting as accents to the larger players like Edelgard or Dimitri. For being the driving force behind everything, they lack the subtlety that would seem to require. Kronya doesn't even bother to pretend to act like the person she replaces. Solon gets Tomas's mannerisms down well enough that people who worked with him for decades can't tell the difference, but Kronya isn't even trying. Then she has the Titanic-brained idea to stab Geralt right after he interferes with her experiments on some demonic beasts, in spite of the fact that Geralt thought she was in danger. Instead of playing along and keeping herself hidden, she stabbed him. This then led to Talus being forced to reveal himself to save her as to prevent anything about their biology or soul cores being revealed. Solon isn't immune from the stupid either. When his experiments in Remire village started attracting the attention of the knights, why, oh why, does he reveal himself? Okay, let's play some devil's advocate. Maybe in both cases they knew neither of them could be able to keep up the act after being found right in the middle of it. This could make sense for Solon, as he could easily have been uncertain if or when the church was going to arrive in Remire village. Maybe the same is true for Kronya if she left evidence behind. Either way, it leads to their deaths in the Forbidden Forest. The first of which is due to Solon performing the first instance we see of the spell of Zaharas. This spell, only performed through sacrifice of an Agarthan soul core, in this case, Kronya's, drags a target and anyone nearby into a dark dimension in which only the soul or inner mind is present. This is why in Azure Gleam, Edelgard is present and clear of mind, and why Byleth and Sothis can face each other without sleeping, because it's their souls that are present within Zaharas. Zaharas itself is littered with Agarthan technology, which implies that perhaps they tried sending a lot more than just their enemies to Zaharas, although the reason as to why I am unsure of. Of course, Solin's plan to warp them to the plane of eternal darkness only works so well until Byleth goes Super Saiyan God and cuts through dimensions to return. Congrats, Solin, you just made them stronger. In Crimson Flower, Talus bombed Aryan Road just because Edelgard killed Cornelia for heaven's sake, blatantly showing his hand and revealing the trump card of the Pillars of Light, all because Edelgard did something that mildly annoyed him. He and Cornelia, true name Cleobulus, didn't even like each other. Cleobulus hated how long Talus always took to act. Meanwhile, yes, Cleobulus is a man and considers himself a man despite the body he has taken on. He performs his own sick experiments in the background. Meanwhile, they aren't even present enough in the story to have the decency to die in Crimson Flower. It has to be saved for the epilogue. Honestly, they aren't even all that bad in Crimson Flower itself, but the lack of focus in this route especially is pretty egregious. In Azure Moon, we actually see more of their machination through Cornelia's coup. Talus and Mycen, remember him for a bit, also get to play their parts near the end, even if Talus manages to die in a rather unceremonious way. However, even when Shambhala is not directly under attack in Azure Moon, they still get defeated, yet again in the epilogue thanks to the existence of Happy. In Verdant Wind and Silver Snow, they do a grand total of nothing until they all of a sudden drop the Pillars of Light on Mercius for some reason. Congrats, Dingus, now no one gets the fortress and there's one less obstacle between the enemy and the Emperor you're trying to prevent from dying right off the bat. Said attack even allowed Hubert to trace the missiles back to their origin point in Alliance territory, allowing the heroes to find Shambhala and destroy the morons that can't do anything right in one fell swoop. All except for Cleobulus, who manages to slip between the cracks, it seems. He goes entirely unaddressed for the two routes, which is a complete waste of potential. With Solon and Kranya dead and Talus left for near the end, Cleobulus would have worked well as a middle boss representing the Sith wannabes. Then there's Nemesis. The undead army that they were apparently working on the entire time, but only made him rise from the dead after Verdant Wind. At no other time do they deem the guy who effortlessly takes down Holst, one of the strongest people on the continent, and held back an Imperial and Church army for over a century as a useful pawn. Maybe they thought they couldn't control him, but so what? It's not like they controlled him before, they just pointed him and let him loose. Things don't get much better in Three Hopes, because no matter which route you're in, Talus and the slippery, shady, spooky gang get kicked out of Enbar almost immediately, because for some reason, they held on to Monica rather than just immediately having Kronya replace her. Similarly, Cleobulus rouses yet another rebellion with the Western Wards and the Western Church, but this one also goes absolutely nowhere without the clear support of the Empire, or even it seems the rest of the Agarthans. In Golden Wildfire, they're even more laughably absent, only popping up near the back half of the war to cause a mess in Ordelia before disappearing again. They make something of a showing during the Battle of Garreg Mach, but that's really just a pretense to lead into the secret chapters of that route. In Scarlet Blaze, Talus drags his people out into the open to attack Garreg Mach after their rebellion plan fails, but he manages to pin himself between the Empire and the Church. Now, I don't think he dies in the explosion, nor does Rhea likely, but the fact that it's even possible means that Talus must be the dumbest man possible. You know what was happening not a day or two before this? A battle comprised of all three armies at one place in ALL, the one place they have successfully bombed in the past. I say successfully in quotation marks as they didn't even intend to hit the place. Instead of dropping the Pillars of Light then, killing every viable threat save the comparatively smaller Knights of Saros, who would still be at war with the Empire and the Alliance, they just let them all run towards the monastery. In Azure Gleam, he pulls up out of nowhere to throw a creststone at Edelgard, turn her into a monster you never actually fight, and then leaves her mind broken for the rest of the route. Furthermore, what does he do once he and the Duke are back in power? They let their army basically act like a giant frat house terrorizing the countryside of the Empire. Why? 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 Why are they deliberately wasting their time and energy tearing up the Empire and making its populace angry instead of, I don't know, fighting back the three-pronged invasion they're currently dealing with? Once more, they wind up at the monastery, except now they have 3 armies all united against them, and a very, very angry Dimitri aimed directly at Talus. Yeah, I bet that Nemesis army is looking real nice right about now, Talus. Bet you wish you'd used that, Talus. Epimenides would never have allowed this to happen. Which brings me to the one point of greatest disappointment. Epimenides shows that they used to be something more. Before Talus and his basic, even villain spiel, before Solon and his god complex, before Cleobulus and Cronia's terrible acting, Epimenides clearly showed a side we'd never seen in the Agarthans. And a side that may not have been intended, seeing as this came from Three Hopes, but still, it is part of the canon now. In his own words, he was just an ordinary man. An ordinary man that saw his world and his people under threat and took action. Perhaps he was delusional. Perhaps the Nabateans and Sothis were not really harming or subjugating the people of Fotland, but at least he believed in something. At least he loved his people that is near extinction by the point of houses and hopes, but he still wants to save them, even when the likes of Solon or Talus don't care an inch what happens to their fellow Agarthans. He even feels remorse at the idea of taking the autonomy away from Shez and Arval, which, might I remind you, Sothis herself doesn't bother to do to Byleth in the same game. He openly states his distaste for Talus's methods, likely the kinds of methods that involve experimenting on children and skulking in the shadows. He doesn't even seem to hate the people of Fodlan, who, depending on how you interpret his lines, might not even be anywhere close to related to the Agarthans and were instead made by Sothis. Instead of hate, he feels pity towards them for being duped by Seros telling them that Sothis is a god. He's willing to die for his people, even with the safety net of the Souls Cores, which clearly aren't foolproof plans. But he goes ahead practically on his own to face down Seros, Sethlene, and Keyhole to protect the flank of Nemesis, someone he objectively sees as a rabid animal, but is his ally nonetheless. Even in the modern day, when he kills Solon to trap the Lords, he apologizes to Solon for it. Solon! Remind me what Solon did when he did something similar?
Fear, Crania. Your sacrifice will help to rid this world of the filthy vermin that have long infested it.
Within Zaharas, he states his reason for killing the Lords is to allow the land to heal, to end the wars that they all caused. Some more than others, but point still stands. Whether you agree with it or not, his intentions are entirely noble, and he's acting with genuine emotion for his people and even some of his enemies. All because he loves his people and wants them to be given their home back, and for said home to be healed. This is a glimpse into what the Agarthans could have been. Not what they are now, but a people who want their home back and will go to any length to see it done, even if it means killing the people who live there now, who have had their society and culture slowly dying beneath the earth as they tried to hide away from a godlike entity that just appeared one day and asserted itself over them. And yet, Epimenides was lost. We see in Azure Gleam multiple times that Mycen encounters Shez and is downright flabbergasted to see Epimenides' power dormant within him. In fact, it appears that some Agarthans aren't even aware of Epimenides' existence, or if they are, they don't recognize his power in Shez. How could this have happened? How could the greatest mage, a downright savior to the Agarthans, be lost, and they didn't even seem to care enough to remember him? Well, and this is entirely a theory, I put the blame on Talus. Epimenides didn't approve of his methods, and was revered by the Agarthans, probably as the closest thing to a god they might have had. Heck, considering that his power is also capable of cutting through dimensions like Sothis, he might as well be one. But somehow his core was lost. And who is it that is in charge afterwards? Talus. He has the most to gain from some unforeseen accident happening to Epimenides. Epimenides would not do something so short-sighted as to attack or hinder his own ally, like Talus did with Aryan Road. Nor would he take the dirtier, more foul tactics Talus clearly preferred. It's possible that Epimenides even hated the idea of their body snatching based on his words about taking over Arval and Shez, and his emphasis on his core being passed down. Almost like it was supposed to be an honor, not something forced onto another. So that could be yet another point of contention between the two. And that's why I think his core was likely lost somewhere 600 years after the War of Heroes. 600 years of near silence from them, and then suddenly they influenced the splitting of the kingdom and the alliance. rather than something more upfront like Epimenides seemed to favor. Maybe I'm coping. Maybe I'm headcanoning too hard. It's always possible, and if we're being honest, it's probably true. But even if I'm wrong, ask yourself one question. Of the two, who do you think could have maybe influenced the Agarthans to be even an ounce more nuanced? Talus or Epimenides? I believe the answer is abundantly clear. In the end, those who slither in the dark's greatest weakness is their wasted potential. For all the setup they have worked into them, for all the music, aesthetics, and gameplay opportunities, and for the unique position they have in the story itself, they waste every possible moment, save for the glimmerings of potential we see in Epimenides and occasionally elsewhere. I know they could have been more. I am the Hearth Guy, and I just want to say, thank you for watching. We hit 1,000 subscribers, and we've only gone up. I'm officially making money off these videos now, which is astounding to think about. I could not have done it without you all. So, like, comment, and subscribe if you want to keep supporting what I'm doing. I've almost hit the end of what I can cover in Fodlan, so we're going to have to start considering what other worlds for me to create videos like these about. I've started to call them my tour guides to insert name here, and I'm considering one for the world of Elder Scrolls next, but I want your input. I've got one more video on Fodlan coming up, but once that's through, it's just the reworking videos on Three Houses routes, and each of those will most likely take a lot of editing time, and I'd hate to ghost you all with similar styled videos in between. I'm also still working on countdowns, naturally, and anything else that catches my fancy, but your support has ensured me that this kind of video will likely become a staple of my channel. Heck, it already has. As always, consider giving to either become a Patreon or a channel member. There's only one tier for either, a $3 tier, and with this comes access to a private Discord server where you can directly interact with me and anyone else who might decide to pay to help with all this. You also get access to, on both, special polls or announcements that only go out to you guys, as well as shoutouts and thanks in my videos. Naturally, none of that is a must. You may pay as you please, and it always helps. Especially in this day and age. Regardless, it's all thanks to you. So without any further ado, I am the Hearth Guy, and I will see you all next time around the hearth. Ah, Fodlan, what a lovely, truly screwed up place that I'm surprised hasn't burned down to the ground faster. There really is no place like you in all the... Wait, what's going on over there? Hold on. There are other places on this planet?